Welcome to True Crime Deep Dive. I am your host, Sherry.
I'm your host, Mark.
Let's dive into it.
Ever heard that saying, the banality of evil?
Oh, yeah.
It really gets you thinking when you look at these cases, These seemingly normal people living regular lives, and then bam, they commit these truly horrific acts. And what's really scary is how they often just blend back into society, undetected for years.
It's chilling, really. The idea that someone you might pass on the street, someone who could be your neighbor or coworker, could be harboring such darkness.
That's exactly what we're going to dive into today. How do these crimes go unnoticed for so long? How much of it is just dumb luck, or even the killer's own mistakes that finally lead to their capture? And, let's be honest, how often do the systems that are supposed to protect us kind of fail? We've got some really fascinating material to work with here. One source even calls these guys the 7 deadly sinners of the true crime world.
I like that, 7 deadly sinners. It really captures the sense of, well, sin, right? This transgression against humanity. And it highlights how these individuals, often with such carefully constructed facades, can be so utterly deceptive.
Right. We're talking about people who were masters of blending in. Not just shadowy figures lurking in the dark, but seemingly normal folks, integrated into their communities, often holding down respectable jobs, raising families, and all the while, they're carrying out these horrific acts. So we're going to walk through some truly mind-boggling cases. We'll look at the almost unbelievable ways some of these individuals were caught, sometimes through pure luck, sometimes because of their own unbelievable blunders, and sometimes because they just got too cocky. It's dark territory, no doubt, but it's important to try to understand.
Absolutely. If we can dissect the mechanisms, the psychology, the societal factors that allow these crimes to occur and persist, maybe we can get a little closer to preventing them in the future.
Exactly. And it all starts with understanding how these individuals operated, how they managed to live these double lives, often for years. Let's start with a guy named Dennis Nilsen. On the surface, totally unremarkable.
Dennis Nilsen, a quiet, polite civil servant in London, worked for the government, seemed well-liked by his colleagues.
The picture of normalcy. And yet...
And yet, beneath that veneer of ordinariness was a deeply disturbed and, frankly, terrifying individual.
It's almost like the more ordinary they seem on the outside, the more disturbing the reality is.
I think you're right. It challenges our assumptions about who we can trust, who we perceive as dangerous. It forces us to confront the idea that evil can lurk anywhere, even in the most mundane places.
And Nilsen's capture in February of 1983 was almost absurdly ordinary. It all started with blocked drains in his apartment building. Multiple residents had been complaining about this awful smell. And get this, Nilsen himself had even complained to the landlord about it. Can you believe that?
It's almost like he was so detached from the reality of his crimes that he couldn't even recognize the smell for what it was. Or maybe he just thought he was so clever, so untouchable, that he could get away with anything.
So a drain cleaning company gets called in, and this worker, Michael Catran, starts investigating. He smells the stench too, right? And at first he just thinks it's a dead animal or something, but then he starts pulling out what look like human remains. And Nilsen, cool as a cucumber, walks up and casually says something like, "Oh, someone must have flushed down their Kentucky Fried Chicken."
The sheer audacity of that statement, trying to play it off as something so trivial. But Catran wasn't fooled. He found what looked like a human eye and immediately knew something was seriously wrong.
He took his findings straight to a pathologist, while Nilsen unbelievably just went back to his apartment. No panic, no remorse, just chilling indifference. And it turns out this wasn't Nilsen's first rodeo, so to speak.
Yeah.
At his previous residence, he had a whole system for getting rid of bodies.
Oh, Melrose Avenue. It was a house of horrors, to put it mildly. He buried some victims under the floorboards. Others he burned in the garden, often using tires to fuel the fire. It's just a horrifying thought. Imagine kids playing nearby, none the wiser, while this man is literally incinerating human remains.
It paints a disturbing picture, right? The ease with which he incorporated these horrific acts into his everyday life.
And then there's a question of motive. Why did he do it? Our sources indicate that after a relationship ended, Nilsen was consumed by loneliness. He killed, in a twisted way, to have company.
To have someone talk to, it's so disturbing. It speaks to a complete inability to form genuine human connections.
He would lure these young men back to his apartment, often getting them drunk, and then strangle them in their sleep. And after they were dead, it gets even more grotesque.
This is where it really goes off the rails.
He kept the bodies, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. He washed them, dressed them, sat them in chairs, even talked to them like they were still alive. One source even mentions him slapping a body's knee when he found something funny on TV.
It's just beyond comprehension. The level of detachment, the perversion of human interaction.
It's a level of depravity that's hard to wrap your head around.
So, back to the block trains. The day after Katrin's discovery, the police show up. They find the human eye, the smell is overpowering, and Nilsson just calmly points to a wardrobe and says, "I think that's what you're looking for."
And then he just confesses, matter-of-factly, like he's recounting a grocery list. He calls it a long story, says he wants to get it off his chest. And when asked how many victims, he simply says 15 or 16 since 1978.
The sheer scale of it, and delivered with such chilling composure, it's just bone-chilling.
And it raises a really important point. A lot of Nilsson's victims were young, gay, homeless men, and tragically at that time, the police just weren't as concerned when those kinds of individuals went missing.
You're right, it's a terrible reflection of societal biases and how they can impact investigations. If these victims had been from different backgrounds, maybe things would have been different. Maybe Nilsson would have been caught sooner.
It's a sobering thought, but it also underscores the importance of recognizing and addressing those biases, both within law enforcement and within society as a whole. We need to make sure that every victim, regardless of their background, is given equal consideration and that every case is investigated thoroughly and with compassion.
It's a powerful lesson, and sadly one that continues to resonate today. So Nilsson's story is a reminder that even the most seemingly ordinary people can harbor profound darkness, and it highlights how societal biases can have a very real impact on justice. Now, let's shift gears and talk about another killer whose ego, according to our sources, played a huge role in his downfall, Dennis Rader, the BTK killer.
Dennis Rader. The BTK killer, that moniker bind, torture killer, just sends chills down your spine, doesn't it? What makes his case so fascinating and so disturbing is that he was a master of deception. He lived this perfectly normal life on the surface, while underneath, well, we know it lurked underneath.
It's like the classic Jekyll and Hyde story, right? But in real life, with real victims.
Exactly. And for Rader, that double life was incredibly elaborate. He had a college degree, he worked various jobs, he was married with kids, he was even a Boy Scout leader and the president of his church council. Imagine that. The president of your church council, someone you trust, someone you look up to, is secretly a serial killer.
It makes you question everything you think you know about people. And Rader's fascination with violence started early. Our sources say he kept detective magazines, the kind with lurid images of women in compromising positions, hidden near his family's chicken coop. He even admitted to having fantasies about killing from a young age and would tie himself up and act them out.
Those early fantasies are a crucial piece of the puzzle. They suggest that this wasn't just something that developed later in life, but rather a deep-seated compulsion that was present from a very early age. It makes you wonder, how much of our behavior is determined by nature versus nurture? How much control do we really have over our darkest impulses?
And the terrifying thing is that Rader didn't just fantasize about killing. He acted on those fantasies, and he did so in a methodical and brutal way. His known killing started in 1974 with the horrific murder of the Otero family, husband, wife, and 2 young children.
Those murders were shocking in their brutality. He cut the phone lines, broke into their house with a kit he called his murder toolkit, bound them, and then killed them one by one. It's chilling to think about the terror that family must have felt in their final moments.
And after those murders, Rader did something that would become his signature. He started communicating with the police. He wanted credit for his crimes. He wanted to control the narrative. He even adopted the moniker BTK in these communications, like he was some kind of brand.
It's the narcissism, isn't it? That desperate need for recognition, for notoriety. It's almost like he wanted to be famous for his crimes. He even expressed admiration for other notorious serial killers, like he saw himself as part of some twisted elite.
He was playing a game with the police and with the public. He'd send letters, make phone calls, leave cryptic clues, and for a while it worked. He managed to disappear for years, and the case went cold. But then, in 2004, his ego got the better of him. He resurfaced.
He just couldn't resist the temptation to insert himself back into the story. He sent a photocopied driver's license of a murder victim to the Wichita Eagle newspaper, signing it with a fake name, Bill Thomas Kilman. It was a bold move, and it was the beginning of his end.
It's almost unbelievable how careless he became. He sent more letters, even this weird puzzle to the police, and then, in 2005, he made what turned out to be a fatal mistake. He sent them a floppy disk.
And not just any floppy disk. He first sent a letter asking if they could trace a floppy disk if he sent one. The police, likely realizing they had him on the hook, said no, they couldn't. But they could, and they did.
It's like he forgot that computers leave traces,
Oh.
metadata. They traced the floppy disk back to a computer at, wait for it, Christ Lutheran Church.
Yeah.
And guess who was the president of the church council?
Dennis Rader. And once they had his name, they were able to match his DNA to evidence from the crime scenes. Game over.
Rader's confession in court was another chilling display of his narcissism. He spoke for hours in graphic detail about his crimes. It was like he was relishing the attention, like it was his moment in the spotlight.
Some people even compared it to an Academy Awards acceptance speech. It was truly disturbing to see someone so detached from the suffering they had caused.
And it's that detachment, that lack of empathy, that makes Rader so terrifying. He was a monster hiding in plain sight, and it took his own enormous ego to finally bring him down. Now, let's talk about another killer whose case really pushes the boundaries of what we consider human. Albert Fish.
Albert Fish. That's a name that sends shivers down your spine, even among those of us who've delved into the darkest corners of true crime. He was something else entirely. The seemingly harmless grandpa figure who committed acts so horrific, they'd make even the most hardened investigator blanch.
I've seen the pictures. The kindly old grandpa image just makes it all the more disturbing.
It does. And what makes Fish particularly terrifying, I think, is that alongside his extreme sadism towards others, there was this disturbing element of self-inflicted pain. It's like he was driven by this internal darkness that he projected both inwards and outwards.
Our sources mention x-rays showing 28 needles embedded in his thighs and groin. He would beat himself with nail-studded paddles, even set his genitals on fire. It's hard to even imagine the level of torment he must have been experiencing.
Torment is the right word. It's like he was trying to punish himself, to atone for something. But at the same time, he was inflicting unimaginable pain on others.
And the nicknames he earned are just chilling. The Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, the Boogeyman. It's like he stepped straight out of a nightmare.
He claimed to have killed over 100 people, though most believe that's an exaggeration. But even a fraction of that number, it's just staggering.
His descent into madness seems to have been fueled by this deeply disturbing belief that God was telling him to harm children.
It's a classic case of religious delusion being twisted into something truly horrific. And what's even more tragic is that he actually told psychiatrists about his violent hallucinations, about his urges to harm children, but he was repeatedly deemed sane.
Which allowed him to continue his horrific crimes. It makes you wonder, how many other Albert Fishes are out there? How many people are slipping through the cracks because we're not adequately equipped to recognize and address their mental illness?
It's a question that haunts me. But back to Fish. In 1928, he answered a newspaper ad placed by one of the Budd family's sons who was looking for work.
And Fish, using a fake name, weaseled his way into their lives. He presented himself as a respectable, single father and charmed the family. He even convinced them to let their young daughter, Grace, go with him to a fake birthday party for his equally fake niece.
It's just sickening the way he manipulated them, preying on their trust. And the last time the Budd family saw Grace, she was walking hand in hand with Albert Fish, entering a subway station.
And then, silence. For 6 long years, the Budd family had no idea what had happened to their little girl, until one day a letter arrived. A letter so horrific, it's hard to even talk about.
That letter, it was like something out of a horror movie. Fish detailed his sickening acts against Grace, describing how he killed her, and, well, the details are just too gruesome to repeat.
And the worst part is, that letter was his undoing. He used an envelope that had the return address of the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association, or NYPCBA.
A seemingly insignificant detail, right? But it was all the police needed. They traced the envelope back to a janitor who had used it, and he led them to Fish's previous address. From there, it was just a matter of time before they tracked him down.
And when they finally caught him, he confessed to everything. He even admitted to killing and cannibalizing other children.
The details of his crimes were so horrific that his own lawyer refused to ever publicly reveal their full extent. He was executed in 1936, but the shadow of his crimes, it still lingers.
It's a story that really stays with you, doesn't it? A reminder that evil can wear the most innocent of masks. And now, let's move on to a case that highlights not just the killer's horrific actions, but also some deeply troubling failures within law enforcement. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper.
Peter Sutcliffe. He terrorized northern England for years. And what makes his case so frustrating, so infuriating, is that he could have been caught much sooner. There were so many missed opportunities, so many blunders by the police, it's enough to make your blood boil.
One source even calls it a catalog of police errors, and I have to agree. The biggest blunder, perhaps, came in July 1979.
That's right. A police constable, Andy Laptew, interviewed Sutcliffe and was convinced he was the Ripper. He even reported his suspicions to his superior officer. But guess what? The superior officer dismissed Laptew's concerns, even threatened him with traffic duty if he kept bringing it up.
Can you believe that? It's just unbelievable. And it had tragic consequences. Sutcliffe went on to kill more women.
And those victims, many of them were sex workers, living and working in some of the most impoverished areas of Leeds and Bradford. Tragically, there's evidence to suggest that their social status influenced the police response.
You're right. The police even made this terrible statement, differentiating between prostitutes and innocent girls, like some victims were somehow less deserving of justice. It's a disgusting and deeply harmful way of thinking that undoubtedly hindered the investigation.
It absolutely did. And on top of that, Sutcliffe was interviewed by the police 9 times. 9 times. He fit the descriptions, he had the right accent, and he even worked for a company that was linked to one of the murders.
But they just let him go, over and over again. It's like they couldn't see past his seemingly ordinary life. He was married, he had a job. He just didn't fit their preconceived notion of what a serial killer should look like.
And then there was the whole Wearside Jack fiasco. This guy starts sending tapes and letters to the police, claiming to be the Ripper, but with a completely different accent. And for some reason, the police become fixated on this hoax, diverting resources and attention away from the real investigation.
It's mind-boggling. They even had the FBI's behavioral analysis unit tell them that the hoaxer wasn't the killer, but they just wouldn't listen. It's like they were so desperate for a break in the case that they latched on to anything, even if it didn't make sense.
It's a classic case of tunnel vision. And it had devastating consequences. More women died because of it.
And then, get this. One of Sutcliffe's own friends, a guy who had been suspicious of him for a while, sends a letter to the police, explicitly naming Sutcliffe as the Ripper, even giving them his address.
But somehow that letter either got lost or was ignored. It's like...
Yeah.
The police had all the pieces of the puzzle, but they just couldn't put them together.
It's incredibly frustrating and incredibly sad. So many lives could have been saved if they had just connected the dots. But they didn't, and Sutcliffe was free to continue his reign of terror.
Until finally, in 1981, he was arrested during a routine traffic stop. The police officer noticed he had fake license plates, and Sutcliffe, in a moment of panic, tried to ditch his weapons. A knife, a hammer, and some rope.
But even then, they almost messed it up. They put him in a holding cell without properly searching him, and he still had another knife hidden on him. It wasn't until later when the officer who arrested him told his superiors about the weird way Sutcliffe had been acting that they finally went back and found the discarded weapons.
It's just mind-blowing. The level of incompetence is astounding. And when they finally interrogated him, Sutcliffe confessed he said he was just cleaning up the place a bit. It's a chilling statement, one that reveals just how little regard he had for human life.
He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, where he died in 2020. But the Yorkshire Ripper case is a stain on British law enforcement. It's a story of missed opportunities, of arrogance, of systemic failures that allowed a monster to roam free for far too long.
It's a story that should serve as a warning, a reminder that we can never be complacent. We need to be constantly vigilant, constantly questioning, constantly pushing for better systems and better training to ensure that something like this never happens again.
And that brings us to another killer who seemed almost designed to evade detection.
Israel Keyes.
Israel Keyes. Now, there's a chilling figure. This guy was cold, calculating, and utterly remorseless. He even looked down on other serial killers who showed any kind of regret. He idolized Ted Bundy, which says a lot about his mindset.
He operated across the entire United States, meticulously planning his crimes and taking extreme measures to ensure his victims were never found. Talk about a nightmare for law enforcement. It was almost like he had studied every serial killer case in history and learned from their mistakes. He used cash, burner phones, he bought his weapons and supplies in different states. He was a ghost, a phantom.
And his crimes were horrific. In 2012, he kidnapped and murdered Samantha Koenig, a young woman in Anchorage, Alaska. He even staged a ransom note and then went on a cruise with his daughter while the police were searching for her.
It's just beyond comprehension. The level of callousness, the ability to compartmentalize, it's terrifying. And there's speculation that he may have even undergone plastic surgery and removed his fingerprints to make himself even harder to identify.
He was a true criminal mastermind. in a sick and twisted way.
And what's really frustrating is that the Anchorage Police Department decided not to release the surveillance video of Koenig's abduction, saying it would be too disturbing for the public.
They argued that it wouldn't help the investigation, but some people believe that releasing the footage could have generated leads or even led to Keyes' identification sooner.
It's a tough call, ethically speaking. On the one hand, you want to protect the public from potentially traumatizing images. On the other hand, you want to do everything in your power to catch a dangerous criminal.
Ultimately, Keyes was caught because he slipped up. He used Koenig's stolen ATM card in Arizona, and he was caught on camera. When the police finally arrested him in Texas, they initially thought they were dealing with a simple kidnapping case.
They had no idea they had a serial killer on their hands. It was only during interrogation that Keyes started confessing to other murders, calmly describing how he had managed to evade detection for so long.
He eventually committed suicide in his cell, leaving behind a chilling ode to murder and a drawing of 11 skulls.
It's like he wanted to make sure he had the last word, that he left his mark on the world, even in death.
It's a reminder that some people are just beyond redemption. They're driven by this darkness that we can't fully comprehend. But Keyes' case also highlights the challenges of tracking and apprehending these highly mobile, highly intelligent predators.
We need better communication between law enforcement agencies, better data sharing, better use of technology. We need to be constantly evolving our methods to stay ahead of these criminals.
Absolutely. And now let's turn to the disturbing and, in some ways, almost tragically absurd story of Joel Rifkin, whose case is perhaps most chillingly introduced by the gruesome discovery of a severed human head in a paint can found on a golf course.
Joel Rifkin. A case that truly highlights the darkest side of human nature. And it's also a story that underscores how even the most meticulously planned crimes can unravel in the most unexpected ways.
Rifkin was bullied mercilessly as a child, likely due to learning disabilities. And it seems that those experiences, well, they warped him in a profound way.
He committed his first known murder in 1989, and what's striking is the level of almost scientific precision he used to try to cover his tracks.
It's like he had this strange duality. Learning difficulties on the one hand, but this almost forensic awareness on the other.
He removed his victims' teeth and fingertips, dismembered the body, and scattered the parts in different locations. It was chillingly methodical.
And the sources we've looked at suggest that if he hadn't confessed, he might never have been caught. He was that good at covering his tracks.
Which brings us to a truly disturbing point. Many of Rifkin's victims were prostitutes and drug addicts. They were, to use a truly awful phrase, less dead in the eyes of society. And that likely contributed to the lack of urgency in the police response.
It's a tragic reflection of how societal biases can impact investigations. These women, these human beings, deserve justice just as much as anyone else.
Absolutely. But their marginalized status made them easier targets, and it made it easier for Rifkin to get away with his crimes for as long as he did.
He continued killing, refining his methods, using concrete blocks and oil drums to dispose of the bodies. He thought he was invincible.
Until June of 1993, when he made a series of blunders so incredibly stupid that it's almost hard to believe.
It's like he suddenly lost his mind. He left a body decomposing in his mother's garage for 3 days in the middle of summer. Then he drove off with the body still in his truck, and he was missing a license plate.
It's like he was asking to be caught. And that's exactly what happened. The police spotted his truck, the smell was overwhelming, and a high-speed chase ensued.
The chase ended with Rifkin crashing his truck right outside a courthouse. Talk about poetic justice.
He confessed to everything, even provided maps to help the police locate the bodies of his victims. It was like the dam had broken. All that carefully constructed control, all that meticulous planning, it all went out the window.
And now he's spending the rest of his life behind bars. Our sources even mention a bizarre encounter he had in prison with another notorious killer, Colin Ferguson, the Long Island Railroad shooter.
Apparently they got into an argument about who was the better killer.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? Two monsters comparing notes, vying for some kind of twisted status within the prison hierarchy. It speaks to the depths of their depravity, their utter lack of remorse. Absolutely. And finally, let's talk about a killer whose case is particularly relevant in light of current events. Andrei Chikatilo, arguably Russia's most notorious serial killer.
Chikatilo, the Rostov Ripper. His case is a fascinating and disturbing study in the intersection of individual pathology and societal denial.
And it's eerily relevant today as we see similar denials and cover-ups happening in Russia with the invasion of Ukraine and the suppression of dissent.
It's like, Some things never change.
Chikatilo's story is set against the backdrop of the Soviet Union, a regime built on the idea that such horrors couldn't exist within their system.
They refused to acknowledge the reality of serial killers, even as the bodies piled up. It was seen as a symptom of Western decadence, a problem for capitalist societies, not for the supposedly morally superior Soviet Union.
That denial, that refusal to face reality, had devastating consequences. It allowed Chikatilo to operate with impunity for years. And what's even more disturbing is that there were early warning signs that he's a danger to others.
Oh, absolutely. He had a history of inappropriate behavior, of sexual assault. He was fired from multiple teaching positions for groping students, but those incidents were brushed aside, minimized.
Because, again, the system couldn't admit that such things could happen within their perfect society. And so Chikatilo was free to continue his escalation of violence.
And escalate he did. His crimes were brutal, horrific. He mutilated his victims, often targeting women and children. The details are, well, they're hard to stomach.
But even as the body count rose, the authorities remained in denial. They refused to believe that they had a serial killer on their hands.
They launched massive police operations, but they were often poorly organized and ineffective. They focused on rounding up usual suspects, drunks, homeless people, anyone who fit the profile of a socially undesirable element.
They even had a close encounter with Chikatilo himself at a train station. He had blood on his clothes, but he claimed he'd been picking mushrooms, and they believed him.
It's almost laughable if it weren't so tragic. But finally, after years of denial and missteps, a breakthrough came. A persistent detective linked Chikatilo to past sexual offenses that have been dismissed or poorly documented.
It was like, mash. Suddenly, all the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. They had their man.
They arrested him, but Chikatilo refused to confess. And that's where another fascinating figure enters the story, Alexander Buchanovsky, a forensic psychiatrist.
Buchanovsky was a pioneer in criminal profiling. He created a psychological profile of the killer that was so accurate it was almost eerie.
He identified Chikatilo as an educated man, likely impotent, with a deep-seated hatred of women, and he used that profile to develop a unique interrogation strategy.
He didn't bully or threaten Chikatilo. Instead, he talked to him, he listened to him. He delved into his childhood traumas, his feelings of inadequacy, his warped worldview.
And it worked. Chikatilo broke down and confessed to everything. He admitted to killing dozens of people, more than the police even knew about.
He was convicted and executed in 1994. But his case remains a stark reminder of the dangers of denial, of the importance of facing reality, no matter how uncomfortable it might be.
And it highlights the critical role that psychology can play in criminal investigations. It's not just about catching the bad guys, it's about understanding them, about unraveling the complex web of factors that lead to these horrific acts.
So as we've journeyed through these dark and disturbing cases, it's become clear that there's no single formula for catching a killer. It's a combination of factors: luck, human error, and, hopefully, the diligent and insightful work of law enforcement.
We've seen killers brought down by their own arrogance, by seemingly insignificant details like an envelope or a floppy disk, by the persistence of a single detective, by the empathy of a psychiatrist.
And we've seen how societal biases, systemic failures, and a refusal to face reality can allow these monsters to thrive.
It's a sobering thought, but it's also a call to action. We need to learn from these cases, to improve our systems, to challenge our assumptions, to be more vigilant, more compassionate, more understanding.
Because only then can we hope to prevent these horrors from happening again. And that, I think, is the ultimate takeaway from this deep dive into the dark side of human nature. We need to be better. We need to do better. And we need to never forget the victims, the lives that were cut short, the families that were shattered.
And that, perhaps, is the most important message of all. We must remember the victims, honor their memory, and work tirelessly to create a world where such tragedies are a thing of the past.
A world where justice prevails, and where darkness no longer has a place to hide.
A world where hope triumphs over evil.
We all have a role to play in creating that world.
It starts with awareness, with empathy, with a refusal to turn a blind eye to the suffering of others.
And it ends with action, with a commitment to making a difference, no matter how small.
We can do this. We must do this.
For the victims, for their families, and for the future.
Let's make sure that their stories are not told in vain.
Let's honor their memory by working towards a brighter tomorrow.
A tomorrow where such darkness no longer exists.
New episodes are going to be released every Tuesday and Friday.
Simple but essential.
Simple but essential information for staying up to date.
Foundational piece of knowledge.
You got it. And with that knowledge, you can engage with our content on your own terms, on your own schedule.
That's the beauty of it.
That's right.
Hmm.
So with that in mind,
Hmm.
think about this now that you know exactly when to tune in.
Think about the future.
What burning questions do you have out there?
Yeah, what topics are you hoping we'll explore in future deep dives?
What sources are just sitting in your archives, just waiting to be unpacked?
We're ready.
Waiting to have their secrets revealed.
Send them our way.
Send them our way. We're always ready for our next dive.
Always.
Guided by your curiosity.
Yeah.
So until then, keep diving,
Happy listening.
and we'll see you soon.
See you next time.
Take care.
Bye.